Hello, welcome to ASMR Sanctuary. Tonight I thought we could go through some of my book collection. What I thought we'd start with is my favorite book, which is Frankenstein. I have 5 copies that I'd like to show you. First copy is the one I am currently reading. Soft cover, the matte black. Back it has one of Frankenstein's monsters quotes. Says, "You were my creator, but I am your master. Obey." Nice red lining on the side of the pages. The front cover is repeated on the inside page. We have the first letters that start the book off. I've been reading it again and I'm currently on chapter 4. Show you my other copies. Ooh. This one next. Is gothic fantasy. F N B A S Y. Gothic fantasy. From Mary Shelley and other authors covering horror stories. First story in here is obviously Frankenstein. They have that cover image repeated on the inside page too. This is the contents. So, like I said, Frankenstein is the first one in there. And Lord Byron right underneath. A foreword about Mary Shelley. Birth of Frankenstein, Tales by Mary Shelley and her friends. Back, the Gothic and Fantasy collection. It says, creator of the first science fiction novel, Mary Shelley was a powerful writer with themes of horror, the supernatural, love, loss, and isolation at the heart of her writing. Frankenstein is known today as an influential and gripping novel, and this collection explores its origins, with works that inspired Shelley, as well as many of her lesser-known tales, including The Invisible Girl, The Mourner, and The Last Man. This is probably one of the prettiest covers. It is a hardcover, which I enjoy reading hardcovers every now and then. The next one is Frankenstein, the graphic novel. Once a little beaten up, I got it used. Here we have Frankenstein's monster on the cover. A classic novel brought to life in full color. We have the characters. We have Victor Frankenstein, Frankenstein's monster, Elizabeth, Robert Walton, the ship's master, ship's lieutenant, we have Alphonse Frankenstein, who is Victor's father. There's Caroline Frankenstein, who is Victor's mother. Here's Ernest Frankenstein, who is Victor's brother. William Frankenstein was Victor's younger brother. Henry Lerville was Victor's friend. Is Justine Moritz, who was a servant of the Frankenstein household. One fun fact you'll notice in the story there is no character of Igor. Igor was actually a creation in the film's adaptation of Frankenstein, and so he never actually appears as a character in the books. The prologue. The story starts on the ship. We have the first letters that start off the story. And then following the adventurers and the ship's crew. We see a mysterious figure crossing across the snow. We stop. We talk to the mysterious figure. And of course, that is Victor Frankenstein. Victor starts to make friends with the captain. He starts telling him his story. And that starts off where we actually start seeing the story of Victor Frankenstein and the creation of his monster. Here's Victor Frankenstein with his creation. This is Volume 1, Chapter 4. It was on a dreary night, November, that I beheld the accomplishment of my toils. I collected the instruments of life around me, that I might infuse a spark, of being into the lifeless thing. His limbs were in proportion, and I had selected his features as beautiful. One of the best parts of the story, I think, is that even while Victor Frankenstein is making something that is kind of gruesome and grotesque at times, he always sees it as beautiful. During the creation part, of course, and then, well, after he brings it to life, he looks at his creation and only sees it as an abomination and something to fear. This is one of Stein's monsters' first encounters with other people. He's been driven out by Frankenstein and living in the forest and listening to birds and trying to figure out how life works. He comes across a cabin and ends up hiding in a stable and watching this family go about their life. And when he tries to approach them, the old man is blind and doesn't realize that the creature he's talking to. But then the man's son arrives and starts to attack the monster. And we see how much cruelty is put towards him. Just being different than everybody else. Adds a little biography about Mary Shelley as well at the end of the book. This is Mary Shelley's portrait. My next copy is Frankenstein, the manga by Junji Ito, which, if you know his other work, I think that fits perfectly. Makes a lot of horror manga and anime. This is a really beautiful cover. It's dark in all of the right ways. Like the other, we start on the ship. We see the mysterious figure. This one has quite a bit more material than the graphic novel did. Let's open. Here's a great part in the story where is Victor Frankenstein, who is out on a hike climbing one of the mountains, and he hears a sound echoing in the hills and the mountains and in the storm. And he sees a figure bounding across the rock in an almost unhumanly manner. He reveals himself as Frankenstein's creation. He's come basically to beg Frankenstein for help. Says, I entreat you, hear my tale. So, Frankenstein's monster has come to his creator to tell him the story of his life. Try to make his creator see that he isn't just an evil being that needs to be destroyed, but something that is alive and deserves compassion and love. You created me. Take responsibility as my maker. Here, he croaks out, Frankenstein. And Frankenstein looks at him in horror. You speak. Responsibility. How brazen. He tries to attack his creation with a stone. And this monster stops him with ease. Frankenstein's too angry. He calls out, my responsibility to you is to destroy you. Frankenstein's monster forces him down. Says, listen to me, and then, if you can, and if you will destroy me, destroy the work of your hands. There's a hut on the mountain ahead. You'll hear my tale there. So the two of them walk towards the cabin, and Frankenstein's monster and Frankenstein himself talk and argue. We get to learn about the experience of life from Frankenstein's creation. Here he is, wandering into town, being chased out by the villagers with pitchforks, knives, and fire. I have one more copy, which is actually a birthday present. It was a custom binding done by my sister-in-law. I have F R A A E N S T E I N Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Binding's supposed to look like stitched skin. It's a older copy. It's one of my favorite copies. So, this is one of the inspirations for Mary Shelley writing Frankenstein, which was from Paradise Lost. It says, "Did I request thee, Maker, from my clay to mold the man? Did I solicit thee from darkness to mold me?" One of my favorite things about this copy is Actually, the preface talks about the creation and inspiration for the story of Frankenstein. I'll read this part to you. It says, "The event on which this fiction is founded has been supposed by Dr. Darwin and some of the physiological writers of Germany as not of impossible occurrence. I shall not be supposed as according to the remotest degree of serious faith to such an imagination. Yet, in assuming it is the basis of a work of fancy, I have not considered myself as merely weaving out a series of supernatural terrors. The event on which the interest of the story depends is exempt from the disadvantages of a mere tale of spectres or enchantment. It was recommended by the novelty of the situations which it develops, and however impossible as a physical fact, affords a point of view to the imagination for the delineating of human passions more comprehensive and commanding than any which the ordinary relations of existing events can yield." That's the introduction to the preface, which was in September 1817. What he's essentially saying is this is a work of fantasy and he doesn't want to give it too much thought beyond that, but other physicians and people such as Darwin don't put it past the realm of possibility of a Frankenstein's monster creation being in the realm of reality. It also has an author's introduction. This is actually the first copy that I ever had that I got from my aunt. And it was passed around amongst the family and eventually came back to me after my sister-in-law rebound it for my birthday. So, on the back, she put a poem that I wrote about Frankenstein. It's only part of the poem, but I'll tell you the whole thing here. It goes, "Smell of blood and putrefaction fills my soul with pure delight. Pieces from the grave, like a puzzle my picture made. Turn this dust now back into life. Just the shock now. You will be alive." I wrote it as a introduction to a story that I'm writing based on Frankenstein that is going to be taking place in modern day and using modern medical practices and new research that's coming out in the field of regenerative medicine. And even though the character Igor doesn't exist in the actual book, I'm going to make him the main character of my story. Yeah, that is My favorite book of all time. Hope you enjoyed the collection of Frankenstein stories that I have. I thought I would finish this video with reading chapter 1 of Frankenstein. I'm going to be reading out of the Gothic Fantasy hardcover edition. Chapter 1. I am, by birth, a Genevese, and my family is one of the most distinguished of that republic. My ancestors had been, for many years, councillors and syndics, and my father had filled several public situations with honor and reputation. He was respected by all who knew him for his integrity and indefatigable attention to public business. He passed his younger days perpetually occupied by the affairs of his country. A variety of circumstances had prevented his marrying early, nor was it until the decline of life that he became a husband and the father of a man. As the circumstances of his marriage illustrate his character, I cannot refrain from relating them. One of his most intimate friends was a merchant who, from a flourishing state, fell through numerous mischances into poverty. This man, whose name was Beaufort, was a proud and unbending disposition, and could not bear to live in poverty and oblivion in the same country where he had formerly distinguished for his rank and magnificence. Having paid his debts, therefore, in the most honourable manner, he retreated with his daughter to the town of Lucerne, where he lived unknown and in wretchedness. My father loved Beaufort with his truest friendship, and was deeply grieved by his retreat in these unfortunate circumstances. He bitterly deplored the false pride which led his friend to a conduct so little worthy of the affection that united them. He lost no time in endeavouring to seek him out, with the hope of persuading him to begin the world again through his credit and assistance. Beaufort had taken effectual measures to conceal himself. It was 10 months before my father discovered his abode. Overjoyed at this discovery, he hastened to the house, which was situated in a mean street near the Ruse. But when he entered, misery and despair welcomed him. Beaufort had saved but a very small sum of money from the wreck of his fortunes, but it was sufficient to provide him with sustenance for some months, and in the meantime he hoped to procure some respectable employment in a merchant's house. The interval was consequently spent in inaction. His grief only became more deep and rankling when he had leisure for reflection, and at length it took so fast hold on his mind that at the end of 3 months he lay on a bed of sickness, incapable of any exertion. His daughter attended him with the greatest tenderness, for she saw with despair that their little fund was rapidly decreasing, and that there was no other prospect of support. But Caroline Beaufort possessed a mind of an uncommon mould. Her courage rose to support her in her adversity. She procured plain work. She plaited straw, and by various means contrived to earn a pittance scarcely sufficient to support life. Several months passed in this manner. Her father grew worse. Her time was more entirely occupied in attending him. Her means of subsistence decreased, and in the 10th month her father died in her arms, leaving her an orphan and a beggar. This last blow overcame her, and she knelt by Beaufort's coffin, weeping bitterly, when my father entered the chamber. He came like a protecting spirit to the poor girl, who committed herself to his care, and after the internment of his friend, he conducted her to Geneva and placed her under the protection of a relation. 2 years after this event, Caroline became his wife. There was a considerable difference between the ages of my parents, but the circumstance seemed to unite them only closer in bonds and devoted affection. There was a sense of justice in my father's upright mind, which rendered it necessary that he should approve highly to love strongly. Perhaps during former years he had suffered from the late discovered unworthiness of one beloved, and so was disposed to set a greater value on tried worth. It was a show of gratitude and worship in his attachment to my mother, differing wholly from the doting fondness of age, for it was inspired by reverence for her virtues and a desire to be the means of, in some degree, recompensing her for the sorrows she had endured, but which gave inexpressible grace to his behavior to her. Everything was made to yield to her wishes and her convenience. He strove to shelter her as a fair exotic is sheltered by the gardener from every rougher wind, and to surround her with all that could tend to excite pleasurable emotion in her and soft benevolent mind. Her health, and even the tranquillity of her hitherto constant spirit, had been shaken by what she had gone through. During the 2 years that had elapsed previous to their marriage, my father had gradually relinquished all of his public functions, and immediately after their union they sought the pleasant climate of Italy, and the change of scene and interest attendant for through that land of wonders was a restorative for her weakened frame. From Italy they visited Germany and France. I, their eldest child, was born at Naples, and as an infant accompanied them in their rambles. I remained for several years their only child. Much as they were attached to each other, they seemed to draw inexhaustible stores of affection from a very mine of love to bestow them upon me. My mother's tender caresses of my father's smile and benevolent pleasure while regarding me are my first recollections. I was their plaything and their idol, and something better, their child, the innocent and helpless creatures bestowed on them by heaven, whom to bring up to good, and whose future lot it was in their hands to direct to happiness or misery, according as they fulfilled their duties towards me. With this deep consciousness of what they owed towards me being to which they had given life, added to the active spirit of tenderness that animated both, it may be imagined that while during every hour of my infant life I received a lesson of patience, charity, and of self-control, I was so guided by a silken cord that all seemed but one train of enjoyment. For a long time I was their only care. My mother had much desired to have a daughter, but I continued their single offspring when I was about 5 years old. While making an excursion beyond the frontiers of Italy, they passed a week on the shores of the Lake of Como. The benevolent disposition often made them enter the cottages of the poor. This to my mother was more than a duty. It was a necessity, a passion, remembering what she had suffered and how she had been relieved, for her to act in her turn the guardian angel to the afflicted. During one of their walks a poor cot in the foldings of a veil attracted their notice of being singularly disconsolate, while the number of half-clothed children gathered around it spoke of penury in its worst shape. One day, when my father had gone by himself to Milan, my mother, accompanied by me, visited this abode. She found a peasant and his wife, hard-working, bent down by care and labor, distributing a scanty meal to 5 hungry babes. Among these there was one which attracted my mother far above all the rest. She appeared to of a different stock. 4 others were dark-eyed, hardy little vagrants. This child was thin and very fair. Her hair was the brightest living gold, despite the poverty of her clothing, seemed to set a crown of distinction on her head. Her brow was clear and ample, her blue eyes cloudless, and her lips the moulding of her face so expressive of sensibility and sweetness, that none could behold her without looking on her as of a distant species, a being heaven-sent, and bearing a celestial stamp in all her features. The peasant woman perceived that my mother fixed eyes of wonder and admiration on this lovely girl, eagerly communicated her history. She was not her child, but the daughter of a Milanese nobleman. Her mother was a German and had died on giving birth. The infant had been placed with these good people to nurse. They were better off then. They had not been long married, and their eldest child was but just born. The father of their charge was one of those Italians nursed in the memory of the antique glory of Italy, one among the schiavi o nuovamente, who exerted himself to obtain the liberty of his country. He became the victim of its weakness. Whether he had died or still lingered in the dungeons of Austria is not known. Property was confiscated, his children became orphans and beggars. They continued with her foster parents, and bloomed in their rude abode. Fairer than a garden rose among leaved brambles. When my father returned from Milan, he found playing with me in the hall of our villa a child fairer than pictured cherub, a creature who seemed to shed radiance from her looks, and whose form and motions were lighter than the chamois of the hills. The apparition was soon explained. With his permission, my mother prevailed on the rustic guardians to yield their charge to her. They were fond of the sweet orphan. Her presence had seemed a blessing to them, but it would be unfair to her to keep her in poverty and want, when Providence afforded her such powerful protection. They consulted their village priest, and the result was that Elizabeth of Enza became the inmate of my parents' house. My more than sister, the beautiful and adored companion of all my occupations and my pleasures. Everyone loved Elizabeth. The passionate and almost reverential attachment with which all regarded her became, while I shared it, my pride and my delight. On the evening previous to her being brought to my home, my mother had said playfully, "I have a pretty present for you, my Victor. Tomorrow he shall have it." And when on the morrow she presented Elizabeth to me as her promised gift, I, with childish seriousness, interpreted her words literally, and looked upon Elizabeth as mine to protect, love, and cherish. All praises bestowed on her I received, as made to a possession of my own. We called each other familiarly by the name of a cousin. No word, no expression could body forth the kind of relation in which she stood to me, my more than sister, since till death she was to be mine only. Thank you for watching. Good night.